This is a Devar Torah that I delivered at Congregation Netovot Shalom in Berkeley on Parashat Vayakhel. Parashat Vayakhel begins with Moses gathering the entire community together for some important announcements. The majority of the narrative is concerned with the building of the Mishkan, the portable desert tabernacle. But before any of this work begins, Moses spends a moment in the opening 3 verses reminding everyone about Shabbat. In preparing for this drash, I found that most of the commentaries focused on the particulars of building the Mishkan. But I kept coming back to those first 3 lines about Shabbat. Why were they here at the beginning of the Parsha? Why is the message so brief but so serious? What is actually being asked of us? Those general questions spawned more pointed questions that I asked myself. What is my relationship to Shabbat? Are my observances sincere and meaningful? Could I get more out of it? Do I even fully understand it? Here is what Moses said then to the children of Israel. For 6 days you shall do work, but on the 7th day, on Shabbat, there shall be for you a holy Sabbath of complete rest for Adonai. All who do work on it on Shabbat shall be put to death. Do not kindle fires in your home on Shabbat. One of the things that caught my attention right away was the consequence of death for working on Shabbat. Wow, that seemed a tad extreme. Yet in trying to find meaning, we have to see beyond the severe, unforgiving language. Our challenge is to listen to this ancient oration from Moses and make it relevant. We could decide that we're dealing with a disturbed and wrathful God and toss Shabbat to the curb, viewing it as a relic from an archaic, unreasonable religion. But I'd like to think there's something deeper in the text. After being initially put off by this strong proclamation, my response evolved into thank you, I get it. The message here is simple because the language is exaggerated to convey a point. The point being Shabbat is really, really important. Incredible wisdom is being imparted to us. We ought to pay attention. Okay, so how to make it relevant? My family is always Shabbat striving but often missing the mark. Our Friday evening ritual is lovely and consistent. Challah, candles, blessings, songs, and a fancy, leisurely meal are all wonderful. But these rituals are not even mentioned in Moses' message. True, all of these things set the tone. But the function of these rituals is to provide something of a portal into the main function of Shabbat, which is a radical release from work. So here's where it gets interesting, and this is why it is radical. It has to do with melacha, which is the word used here in the Torah for work. Melacha is one of 2 words used in Hebrew, the other being avodah, for work. Avodah is a more general term, conveying our usual ideas of what work is. Physical labor, burdensome activity, the opposite of play. Melacha, on the other hand, refers to all the different tasks that were needed to construct the Mishkan. It represents a particular kind of work. Creative effort that demonstrates mastery over nature by manipulating materials and resources. I was surprised to learn that exertion is not what is necessarily forbidden on Shabbat. Creative output and productivity is what we are to avoid. So in the strictest sense, carrying 100-pound weights up and down the stairs is not prohibited on Shabbat, but quietly beating a necklace is. Fascinating. I often wonder about this, usually with great frustration. Why would writing a poem, playing the piano, baking a cake, or knitting, all things that might bring me great pleasure and a sense of relaxation, be forbidden on Shabbat? This is especially confusing since one of the necessary components of Shabbat is oneg, or pleasure. It's like some cruel Zen riddle. Because none of these activities are part of my work week, I could, in a very intentional way, set them apart as something special and relaxing. Yet that's not really the point. The idea for Shabbat is to be contemplative versus productive, receptive versus active. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel reminds us that Shabbat changes our focus to being in the world rather than transforming it. On Shabbat, we accept the world exactly as it is. Nothing more is needed. There is nothing more to do. For 1 day out of the week, we step away from our incessant tinkering with the external world. Perhaps the external world also needs a break from us. The focus for Shabbat is interior. It is a quiet, invisible work that breathes fresh air into the soul. We know this from the text. On the seventh day, God drew a breath and rested, or in Hebrew, God Vayakhel, which essentially means refreshed the soul. Not too long ago, Rabbi Creditor tweeted, "Just a couple more hours till Shabbos. So much work to do. Not going to finish." His words expressed such a refreshing okayness with unfinished work. He showed that the phenomenon is universal. It's not like only rabbis and sages have figured out how to finish everything so that Shabbat is deserved. This is how it is for all of us. We are not being asked to complete all the work in 6 days. We are asked simply to step aside and let the pulsing of the material world go on ahead without us for a little bit. I think this is often the hang-up, or at least it is for me. Then there's also the issue of how to unplug not just from work, but all the stimulating external activities around us, including the screens and the devices. The list of things we are to refrain from is overwhelming, especially living in a vibrant urban environment with a busy, overscheduled family. I ponder this question a lot. Why does the Shabbat message often seem so far out of reach? Since I've been grappling with how to integrate Shabbat more into our lives, we decided to come to services several Saturdays ago without the phone. I could have brought it and silenced it, or I could have left it in the car, but we went cold turkey and we left it at home. Then a strange thing happened. We parked several blocks away, and when we got into the car to return home, it wouldn't start. A friend was scheduled to meet us at our house after services. Frantic energy began to rise, that modern, helpless feeling of not being plugged in, connected, so to speak. Then, in a moment of clarity, we realized we could get help without the phone. So we asked a resident in the neighborhood, an older gentleman, if he could give us a jump. He pulled around in his PT Cruiser, and within minutes our car was running. I offered him our sincere appreciation. He seemed very pleased to be able to help. We shared a moment of sustained, meaningful eye contact. Two people making a connection. One needing help, the other offering it. My daughters got to see the innate kindness of strangers. A AAA driver would have delivered the same end result, but that would have been nothing more than a business transaction. Leaving the phone at home allowed us to have a real connection, to receive a kind gesture, to allow someone in the neighborhood to perform a mitzvah. These are the kinds of connections we need, and these are the kinds of connections Shabbat brings out. Consider the idea that the 7 days of the week mirror the 7 days of creation. In the big beginning of the Torah, before the creation of the world, everything is in a state of tohu vavohu, usually translated as void and empty. Rabbi Schiff from Aish.com translates it as empty and chaotic. That's an interesting idea that something could be both empty and chaotic. He explains that the chaos is potential. Before something is created, actually made manifest, like the cosmos or the Mishkan or the productive work in our lives, there is the unbridled infinite capacity for anything to take shape. This chaotic emptiness is the reflective pause before action is taken. Similarly, we see that although Shabbat is a day of rest, it actually has everything to do with growth and the creative process. Shabbat is often referred to as Me'ein Olam Haba, or a taste of the world to come. However, maybe Shabbat can also allow us to revisit the world that was before creation, Tohu Vavohu. If we choose to pursue this idea, it could have a profound effect on our lives. Shabbat can be a 25-hour period of empty, formless time. And although external creative acts cease, there is an internal chaos of potential growth, potential activity. In this outwardly still place, the capacity for unrealized creation is brewing. It is the liminal place that is neither the history of last week nor the future of next week. It is an in-between place that holds possibility. There's a similar experience in yoga. The final pose of the practice is called Shavasana. After all the action and exertion of the physical practice, the yogi lays in a quiet, relaxed pose. To the observer, it looks as if nothing is happening, and yet this is the pose where everything is happening. This is where the beneficial effects of the practice take hold. It is a place of settling and integration. Shabbat is the Shavasana after a week's worth of vigorous creative work. So finally, what about the last of Moses' points? That of not kindling fire on Shabbat. There are so many things we are to refrain from on Shabbat, and Moses did not painstakingly list them. Why this special attention on fire? There is a beautiful ritual at the end of Shabbat that makes a clear distinction between Shabbat and the rest of the week. Havdalah, which literally means to separate, brings us out of the tohu vavohu state and back into the physical world of duality, of manifestation. This ritual invites us back into the created world by way of activating our senses. But first, before any of that happens, we create Aish, or fire, by lighting the Havdalah candle. The restriction against the melacha of kindling fire, which in modern times extends to turning on electrical devices, screens included, is lifted and becomes the first creative act of our new week, just like when Hashem first created the world. Let there be light. This must be the Aish, the fire that Moses talks about. Perhaps this is why we pay even more attention to this act of melacha over the others. It comes first, is the source of all creation, and must be treated with a particular kind of holiness. What a deeply powerful thing to reenact creation in this way. We cycle through week after week, 6 days of work, followed by quiet reflection and repose. This gives us the opportunity every week to recreate ourselves and appreciate the creation of the world. Shabbat gives us the cocoon time we need so that we can reemerge with the light of the Havdalah candle, regrouped and restored. God ceased all work on the seventh day. In parallel fashion, we are to model this holy formula. The design is genius, in that if we decide to take on the discipline of refraining from melacha, from creative, productive work, what remains? Well, essentially, we remain. Not our products, not our creations, not our work. And our relationships remain, from our most intimate and familiar to the less familiar, like a helpful stranger in the neighborhood. And nature remains. Rabbi Schneerson hints at this idea when he says that on Shabbat we cease to struggle with the world because the world is perfect. In that way we have the opportunity to relate to what is perfect and unchanging in it. When we focus on these more enduring things, we connect with our source, whatever that might mean to each of us. It is usually in these quieter, slower places where we are attuned to relationships rather than our products and our things, that a recognition of the Holy One emerges. Again, that means something different to each of us. In these moments, we may have a momentary awareness that as awesome and creative and influential as we are, there is something far greater that birthed us. And if we are lucky enough to have that realization, as transitory as it may be, we can sometimes even tap into profound gratitude. This is the direction I want to go. So I am grateful for the clear Shabbat reminder and the inspiration found in Parashat Vayakhel. Shabbat Shalom.